power, it made her power functional. It gave the voltage somewhere to go that was worthy of its magnitude. When the grid was dismantled and the ground was removed from the household architecture of the colonized world, the voltage did not go with it. The woman's generative power, her radiant creative force, her high-voltage current, these did not diminish because the social and legal architecture that had structured their expression was destroyed. They remained, fully present, fully operational, fully generating every single moment the same output they had always generated. But now without the containment field, without the ground, without the circuit that gave the voltage its direction and its function, and a high-voltage current without a ground does not gently reduce its output to match the infrastructure available to receive it. It scatters, it arcs, it finds whatever incomplete circuit is nearest and surges through it. It burns through the available channels at a rate that exceeds those channels' capacity to sustain. And eventually, when every available incomplete circuit has been overloaded and the surge has nowhere left to go, it turns inward. And that is where the deepest wound of the ungrounded current lies. In the woman who has been running her own voltage through her own circuitry for so long that she has begun to consume herself from the inside. This is not a moral failure. This is not a character flaw. This is not evidence that she is too emotional, too demanding, too complicated, too much. This is the physics of what happens to a generating system when its output has no adequate receiver. The system does not cease generating. It cannot. The generation is biological. It is constitutional. It is as involuntary as the heartbeat. What changes is where the output goes. And in the absence of the ground that was designed to receive it, the output goes everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, producing the specific pattern of behavior, of relational difficulty, of internal exhaustion, of oscillation between extraordinary power and complete collapse, that the modern world has been labeling as the feminine personality rather than recognizing as the physics of an ungrounded high-voltage system trying to survive in conditions that were never designed for it. The four expressions of the ungrounded current. Just as the wounded pillar expressed itself in four recognizable patterns, the ungrounded current also expresses itself in four primary patterns, each one a different adaptation to the same fundamental wound, each one a different strategy that a high-voltage woman developed for managing voltage that had no adequate ground to receive it. And just as with the pillar expressions, each of these patterns contains within it a genuine capacity, a real and extraordinary strength that has been distorted by the wound rather than eliminated by it. The restoration is not the removal of the pattern. It is the recovery of the capacity that the pattern was protecting. The overcurrent is the first expression. She's the woman who is everywhere, doing everything, holding everything together, present in every room, needed by every person, available at every hour. She has become the ground for her children, the radar for her family, the aegis for her community, the emotional labor provider for her workplace, the crisis manager for her friend group, and the sole income generator, housekeeper, homework supervisor, and spiritual anchor for her household. She is doing the work of an entire battery alone, and she will tell you she is fine. She will tell you she does not need help. She will tell you this even as her adrenal system is running at maximum capacity, her cortisol is chronically elevated, her sleep is fractured, her immune system is compromised. And the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being the only generating and containing and directing function in a system that requires at minimum 4 people to operate correctly has become so normalized that she no longer recognizes it as exhaustion. She calls it life. The collapsed current is the second expression, and she is the woman who was an overcurrent until the system gave out. She burned through every available reserve, exceeded every sustainable output threshold, and then hit the wall that physics always eventually presents to a generating system running without a containment field, the shutdown. The collapsed current is not lazy. She's not depressed in the clinical sense, though her presentation may meet clinical criteria. She's a battery that has been running at full discharge, without recharge for so long that the battery itself has begun to fail. She sleeps too much or cannot sleep. She cannot access the ambition and the drive and the extraordinary creative force that she knows she has because she has demonstrated it in her own life, because there is nothing left in the reserve to fuel it. She is not broken, she is depleted. And depletion, unlike damage, responds to the right conditions of restoration. But the right conditions require the honesty of the diagnosis. You cannot recharge a system you insist is simply tired. The armored current is the third expression. She is the woman who decided after enough burns that the safest thing to do with high voltage was to contain it herself, to build an internal armor that kept the current from reaching anyone who might be damaged by it, or more precisely, that kept anyone from getting close enough to the current to disappoint her again with their inability to receive it. The armored current is formidable. She is impressive. She has the career, the independence, the self-sufficiency, the do-not-need-anyone posture that the modern world has rebranded as feminine empowerment, and that is, in its actual energetic reality, a wound wearing the costume of strength. She does not need a ground because she has built a dam. The dam holds the voltage in. The voltage builds behind the dam with nowhere to go. And behind the armor, in the private hours when the performance of sufficiency is suspended, she is lonelier than anyone who has witnessed the performance has ever imagined. The scattered current is the fourth expression. She is the woman whose voltage, in the absence of a ground to direct it, has been finding any available incomplete circuit and running through it. Multiple relationships that begin at intense voltage and end in burnout. Projects begun at supernova intensity and abandoned when the output exceeds the available infrastructure. Friendships that consume and deplete in cycles. Emotional landscapes of extraordinary highs and crashes that her environment labels as instability, and that are in their actual physics, the behavior of a high-frequency generating system that has no stable channel for its output, and is therefore oscillating between maximum generation and emergency shutdown in a pattern that will continue until a stable ground is found or the generating capacity is permanently compromised. Protocol 1, the current inventory. Purpose: to identify your primary ungrounded current expression and begin the process of locating where and how the wound is expressing itself in your present life. Duration: 45 minutes, uninterrupted. Children asleep or cared for by someone else. This time is yours, take it without apology. What you will need: a notebook and pen. Make yourself a cup of something warm. This protocol should feel like a conversation with yourself that you have been postponing for years. Step 1, the voltage assessment, 15 minutes. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, take 5 slow breaths. Then answer this question honestly in the privacy of your own mind before you write anything. When was the last time you felt your full power moving through you without restriction, without fear of being too much, without the need to manage it or contain it or apologize for it? Locate that memory. Feel it in your body. Notice where in your body you feel power when it is fully present. The chest, the belly, the throat, the hands. Note the location. Now answer, where is that power now? Not where does it go, but where is it currently held? Is it scattered across too many obligations? Is it shut down behind armor? Is it crashed and unavailable? Is it oscillating between surge and collapse? Write the honest answer, not the answer that makes you sound strong. The true answer. Step 2, the expression identification, 15 minutes. Read the 4 expressions again slowly: the overcurrent, the collapsed current, the armored current, the scattered current. Then answer in writing. 1. Which expression is my primary pattern right now? I am not allowed to say all 4 equally. One is primary, name it. 2. Which expression was I in 5 years ago? Has it changed? If it has changed, what changed it? 3. What does my primary expression cost me daily? Not in the abstract. Specifically, name 3 concrete costs, 1 relational, 1 physical, 1 in terms of what I am not building or creating because the voltage is going elsewhere. 4. Who in my life has benefited most from my ungrounded current? Who has been receiving my output without providing anything approaching a ground? I am allowed to name them. In fact, I am required to. The naming is not blame, it is clarity. Step 3. The origin question, 15 minutes. Every ungrounded current expression has an origin in a specific early experience of the ground being unavailable. Answer. 1. Who was the first man in my life who was supposed to be a ground for my frequency? Father, grandfather, older brother, first significant male figure. Was he present? Was he stable? Was he safe? 2. What did I learn about masculine energy from that first experience? Write the specific lesson, not the intellectual understanding but the felt learning. The thing my nervous system concluded about what men are and what they can be trusted to provide. 3. How has that original conclusion been running my relational choices ever since? Be honest. The nervous system's original conclusion about masculine ground is still running. It is visible in every relationship choice made since. Name the pattern. 4. Write this sentence and complete it. I learned to be in your expression because complete it with the truth, not the polished version, the true version. Close the notebook. Do not reread it tonight. Sleep on what you have written. Return to it in the morning with fresh eyes. What you have just done is the most important diagnostic work this volume will ask of you. Everything that follows builds from the accuracy of what you have just written. Chapter 2. The Single Mother, the most ungrounded current in the modern world. We need to talk about the single mother directly. Not around her, not about her in the abstract, not in the language of statistics and social policy that keeps the conversation at a distance from the actual human reality of what she is living. We need to talk to her in the room she is in right now, probably exhausted, probably reading this after the children are asleep because daylight hours do not belong to her, probably carrying the specific kind of tired that does not respond to sleep because it is not a sleep deficit. It is a frequency deficit. It is the exhaustion of a generating system that has been providing output without receiving any corresponding input for longer than the body was designed to sustain. She is not a statistic. She is the most concentrated expression of the ungrounded current that the modern world has produced. She is carrying what the battery was designed to distribute across at minimum 4 people. The generative force of the feminine, the grounding function of the masculine, the foresight of the radar, and the protective compression of the aegis. She is doing all of it, alone, every single day. With children watching and needing and absorbing her frequency into their developing nervous systems as the ambient field of their entire world. She is doing the impossible and calling it Tuesday. The modern conversation about the single mother oscillates between 2 poles that are equally inadequate to the reality she is living. The first pole celebrates her heroism. She is strong, she is resilient, she is doing it all, she is an inspiration. This celebration, while it contains genuine respect for genuine achievement, is also a mechanism of the suppression. Because celebrating the single mother's capacity to carry an impossible load alone is the most effective way of avoiding the conversation about why the load is impossible and who is responsible for the architecture that made it so. If she is strong enough to carry it, we do not need to address why she has to. The celebration keeps the structural critique from being made. The second pole condemns her, directly or subtly, for the consequences her situation produces in her children, her community, and the social fabric. The statistics on children of single mothers, used without their context, are deployed as an argument for her personal failure rather than as evidence of the systemic assault that created the conditions of single motherhood at scale. Both the celebration and the condemnation miss the same thing, the architecture. She is not strong because strength is her personal character trait. She is strong because the system removed the other pole of the battery and left the entire load on her side of the circuit. And the consequences in her children are not the product of her personal failure. They are the product of growing up in a household that is missing the fundamental frequency architecture that children require for full development. Neither the strength nor the consequences are personal. Both are architectural. What she is actually carrying. Let us be precise about what the single mother is carrying, because the precision matters for the diagnosis and the diagnosis matters for the restoration. She is carrying the amperage, the first face of the battery, the raw, earth-frequency generative power of the feminine that was always meant to provide the current that the man's ground would receive, stabilize, and direct outward toward the civilization. In the absence of the ground, she is providing the amperage and attempting to be the ground simultaneously. This is the equivalent of a power plant trying to also be the transformer, the distribution infrastructure, the end-use appliance, and the safety system that prevents overload. Each of these functions is real. Each requires specific architecture. None of them can be performed by the same component without cascading degradation of all functions. She is carrying the voltage. The second face, the radar, the long-range awareness, the foresight, the threat detection, the probability field perception that was always meant to be channeled through the man's direction so that it became actionable intelligence rather than anxiety. In the absence of that channeling, the radar runs without a receiver. It picks up everything: the school situation, the financial trajectory, the emotional state of each child, the neighborhood, the workplace, the ex-partner, the future. All of it arriving simultaneously, without the filter of a stable ground to sort what requires immediate response from what can be held and monitored. The radar, running without a receiver, produces the specific cognitive state that medicine has labeled anxiety disorder, and that is, in its actual architecture, a navigation system with no off switch operating in a world that requires constant navigation. She is carrying the aegis, the third face, the protective compression of the shield that was always meant to be the combined output of all three feminine frequencies processed through the masculine ground. She is the shield, alone, every day, for her children, for her household, for every threat that approaches the field she is responsible for maintaining. The aegis function carried alone produces the specific exhaustion of a woman who can never fully rest because rest would mean the shield drops. And a dropped shield means the children are unprotected. And unprotected children in the frequency environment of the modern world is a risk she cannot accept. So she does not rest. She performs the shield around the clock. And the shield in a single person's biology is not designed for around-the-clock operation. It burns through the adrenal system. It burns through the immune system. It burns through the reserve capacity that was always meant to be available for her own generation and growth. And eventually it burns through her. She is also, in many cases, carrying the economic function that was always meant to be distributed across an extended kinship network. The provision of food, shelter, education, healthcare, clothing, and the 100 other material requirements of raising children in the modern world. This was never in any human culture prior to the colonial period, a function that one person performed alone. The extended family network, the kinship grid, the community of adults surrounding a household, these were the infrastructure of provision. The nuclear unit dismantled that infrastructure. The single-parent household dismantled it further. And the single mother stands at the center of what remains, holding every function of what was always a collective architecture, in a body that was designed to be the radiant source, not the entire power grid. What her children are absorbing. The children of the single mother are not simply children who are missing a father. They are children whose developmental environment is a specific frequency environment, the frequency of a high-voltage generating system carrying an unsustainable load without a ground. That frequency is the ambient field of their entire childhood. Their nervous systems organize themselves within it. Their epigenetic expression is shaped by it. Their internal model of what relationships are, what masculine energy is, what feminine energy is, what safety feels like, what love costs, and what to expect from the people they will one day depend on, all of this is being organized in the specific frequency of the ungrounded current. For the daughters, they are absorbing at the frequency level the lesson that feminine power means carrying everything alone. That strength means self-sufficiency. that needing a ground is weakness, that the full voltage of what they are must be managed and contained rather than received and amplified. They are watching the most important frequency transmission of their lives, the transmission from the woman who is shaping their understanding of what feminine power looks like, and that transmission is, you will do this without adequate support and you will survive it, and survival is success. This is the transmission that produces the next generation of armored currents and overcurrents, not because their mothers failed them, because their mothers had nothing else to transmit. You cannot give what you were never given. You can only transmit the frequency you are living. For the sons, they are absorbing at the frequency level an incomplete and in many ways impossible model of masculine function. They see what the mother needs. They feel the weight she is carrying. They want to help. Many of them begin early and without any conscious decision to try to be the ground for her. The 8-year-old who worries about the bills, the 12-year-old who becomes the emotional support. The 16-year-old who is running adult-level responsibility in a body and a psyche that are not yet equipped for it. This premature recruitment into the ground function, before the boy has received the ground transmission himself, before he has seen it modeled by a man who actually carries it, produces the specific double bind of the son of a single mother. He has more ground orientation than most boys his age because he has been practicing it since childhood, and he has less ground foundation than any boy should have because he was practicing it without a teacher and without the correct developmental conditions. He is a pillar that was built on urgency rather than transmission, and urgency-built structures do not hold indefinitely. Protocol 2, the load audit. Purpose: to make the full weight of what you are carrying visible in a way that the daily management of that weight prevents you from seeing. You cannot put down what you cannot see. You cannot ask for help with what you have not named. This protocol names it. Duration: 1 hour. This is not negotiable. If you do not have 1 hour, that fact is itself the most important data point in this protocol. Step 1, the full inventory, 30 minutes. Open your notebook to a fresh page. Draw a line down the center. On the left side, write what I am carrying. On the right side, write who this was designed for. On the left side, write every single thing you are currently responsible for, every single thing. Do not filter for what seems reasonable or what you have decided to stop complaining about. Write all of it. The children's school schedules and the emotional labor of every relationship and the financial management and the household maintenance and the health monitoring and the social management of the family's community connections and the spiritual holding of the household and your own professional responsibilities and your own body's needs that you're currently not meeting. All of it. This list will be longer than you expect. Let it be as long as it needs to be. Then, for each item on the left, write on the right side who this function was designed to be shared with or distributed across in the full grid architecture. The answer will frequently be multiple people. The pillar, the extended kinship network, the aligned women of the household, the community, write who was supposed to share this, not who is available to share it right now, who it was designed for. The gap between the left column and the right column is the exact measurement of the load you are carrying alone. Step 2, the body reading, 15 minutes. Put the notebook down, sit or lie flat, close your eyes, scan your body slowly from the feet upward. Without judgment, simply notice where you are holding tension, where there is pain, where there is numbness, where there is fatigue that does not lift. Notice the shoulders, notice the jaw, notice the chest, notice the belly, notice the lower back. Each location of chronic tension is a location where the body is carrying a load that the mind has normalized. The shoulders carry responsibility. The jaw carries unexpressed anger and unexpressed grief. The chest carries the grief of everything she has not been able to want for herself because there was no space for her own wanting. The belly carries fear that was converted into management because fear was not an option. The lower back carries the weight of standing alone for too long. Write in your notebook what my body is carrying, that my mind has stopped aknowledging. List each location and the specific load it is holding. Be precise. This is not complaint, this is diagnosis. Step 3, the one ask 15 minutes. Look at everything you have written. Then answer this single question. If I could redistribute one item from my left column to someone else right now, what would it be? Not the most dramatic item. The one that, if it were carried by someone else for 30 days, would give my nervous system enough space to begin to recover. Write the item, write the person or the resource that could carry it. Write what is stopping you from making that redistribution happen. Then write the next smallest possible step toward making it happen anyway. This protocol is not about solving the full load in one session. It is about making the load visible enough that you stop treating it as inevitable. The load is not inevitable, it is architectural, and architecture can be changed, not overnight, but deliberately step by step, starting with the smallest possible redistribution that creates the first breath of space. That space is where the restoration begins. Chapter 3, What was done to her? The feminine wound of the suppression. We established in Volume 2 that the Great Suppression was a deliberate, multi-generational, legislatively and psychologically and spiritually executed campaign to dismantle the grid architecture of sovereign civilization. Volume 2 focused primarily on the legislative dimension and on the impact on the masculine function of the grid. This chapter examines what the suppression specifically did to the feminine function. Because the suppression did not treat the masculine and the feminine dimensions of the grid identically, it targeted them differently with different weapons toward different specific outcomes, and the wounds they produced are different in character even when they share the same origin. The masculine wound was primarily the wound of removal. The man was removed from the household through legislation, criminalization, economic impossibility, and the targeted disruption of the kinship networks that would have sustained the extended masculine presence in the community. The man was taken out of the circuit. The wound is the wound of absence, the wound of the missing transmission. The feminine wound was primarily the wound of redefinition. The woman was not removed from the household. She could not be. She is the biological anchor of reproduction, and therefore the one element of the household architecture that the colonizing system could not legislate away without destroying the labor supply it needed. So instead of removing her, it redefined her. It redefined what she was for, what her power meant, what her role within the household was supposed to look like, and what the relationship between her voltage and the masculine ground was supposed to be. The redefinition operated across 4 specific dimensions, each one targeting a different aspect of the feminine function within the grid architecture, each one designed to convert a sovereign power function into a managed dependency function. Understanding these 4 dimensions is not academic, it is personal. Because every woman alive today who is raised within the cultural inheritance of the suppression is carrying all 4 of these redefinitions in her operating system. Whether or not she is conscious of them, whether or not she would endorse them intellectually, whether or not she has spent years in therapy or activism or spiritual practice attempting to overcome them. They run below the conscious level. They run in the nervous system. They run in the cellular memory. And the protocols in this volume are designed to address them at exactly that level. The first redefinition, from radiant source to servicer. In the grid architecture, the woman was the radiant source. She generated, she created. Her power moved outward from her center into the circuit and through the circuit into the world. She was not organized around serving someone else's output. She was producing her own output, a specific output that was essential to the circuit and that the circuit could not produce without her. Her contribution was not less than the man's. It was different from the man's. And the difference was functional, not hierarchical. Different components of the same circuit, equal in their necessity, distinct in their function. The colonial redefinition converted the radiant source into a servicer, a woman whose function was defined entirely in relation to someone else's needs rather than in relation to her own generative power. The good wife who served her husband's vision rather than contributing her own frequency to a shared grid. The good mother who subordinated her own development entirely to her children's development. The good employee who provided her skills and her labor in service of an organization whose direction she did not determine. In every domain of the redefined feminine life, the organizing principle was service to someone else's agenda rather than the generation of her own. The wound this produced is visible in every woman who has been called selfish for attending to her own development, her own desires, her own frequency maintenance. Selfish is the word the suppression installed to prevent the radiant source from generating, because a generating woman is a sovereign woman, and a sovereign woman cannot be a managed servicer. The word selfish, directed at a woman who is tending to her own frequency, is the suppression's most effective single-word enforcement mechanism. It converts her own generative impulse into shame. And shame, as we established in Volume 3, is the frequency that prevents restoration. The second redefinition, from radar to warrior. In the grid architecture, the second face of the feminine was the radar, the wide-area perceptive function that extended the household's awareness across the probability field, that detected what was forming in the frequency landscape before it materialized as event, that provided the man with the intelligence he needed to direct the grid's response before the threat or opportunity became visible to ordinary perception. The radar was not passive. It was an active, high-powered, sophisticated perceptive function that required significant energetic investment to maintain and that produced intelligence of enormous value to the circuit. The colonial redefinition converted the radar into the warrior, the woman whose wide-area perceptive function, running without the masculine receiver that was designed to receive its intelligence and convert it into decisive action, produces not foresight but anxiety, not intelligence but catastrophizing. Not the God code of the probability field but the endless cycling of threat detection without resolution that the medical community now calls generalized anxiety disorder, and that is, in its actual architecture, a radar running without a receiver in a world that requires constant scanning. The warrior is not broken. The warrior is a radar that has been running at full capacity for her entire life without anyone capable of receiving her intelligence and doing something with it. The worry is not the malfunction. The absence of the receiver is the malfunction. Every time she has tried to communicate what her radar is detecting to a man who was not capable of receiving it at the level it was being offered, who dismissed it or minimized it or was overwhelmed by it or did not understand why she needed him to do something with it right now, she received confirmation that the radar's output had no useful destination. And a perceptive function that produces no useful output eventually turns on itself. The intelligence that was supposed to go outward and protect the household turns inward and produces the specific self-consuming anxiety of a woman who can see everything and change nothing because the architecture that was supposed to convert her perception into action is absent. The third redefinition, from aegis to suppressor. In the grid architecture, the third face of the feminine was the aegis, the compression function, the shield, the woman whose specific capacity was to take the combined output of the earth frequency and the sky frequency and forge them into a contained, directed, sovereign force field. The aegis was the woman whose power was in her capacity to hold, to compress without breaking, to contain enormous force within a precise boundary and maintain that boundary against everything that attempted to penetrate it. She was not soft, she was not gentle, she was the iron flame, and the iron flame does not apologize for its heat. The colonial redefinition converted the aegis into the suppressor, the woman whose capacity for compression and containment was turned inward rather than outward, who was taught to compress and contain not the combined power of the household's grid in service of its sovereignty, but her own power, her own anger, her own clarity, her own hard knowledge of what was happening and what needed to change. The woman who swallowed her truth to keep the peace. Who compressed her full voltage into a socially acceptable output that would not threaten the man who was too wounded to receive her full frequency. Who became so skilled at containing herself that the containment became invisible even to her. Who was told that this containment was grace, was femininity, was the appropriate expression of her power, when it was in fact the weaponization of her greatest capacity against herself. The suppressor carries behind the containment an enormous pressure, the compressed truth of everything she has not been able to say, the compressed anger of everything that has been done to her and to the people she loves that she was not permitted to name, the compressed grief of every version of herself that was abandoned to the requirements of the service function. And compressed material does not dissolve, it accumulates, it builds pressure. It eventually finds a release point, which in the suppressor's case is often the point at which someone finally says the wrong thing at the wrong time, and the full accumulated pressure of years of containment releases in a single moment that the world calls hysteria. And that is, in its actual physics, a pressure release from a containment system that has exceeded its design capacity. The fourth redefinition, from sovereign to competitor. In the grid architecture, the three feminine faces did not compete with each other. They could not. Competition requires that the competing parties want the same thing. The root, the horizon, and the aegis did not want the same thing because they were not the same function. They were distinct, complementary, mutually necessary components of a single circuit. The root could not do what the horizon did. The horizon could not do what the aegis did. There was nothing to compete for because each function was irreplaceable and each was fully occupied with its own specific contribution. There was no comparison possible. You cannot compare earth to sky. They are different things, both necessary, neither substitutable for the other. The colonial redefinition installed comparison as the operating frequency of feminine relationships. It took the natural differentiation of feminine functions and reframed it as a competition for rank. Who is more beautiful? Who is more desirable? Who has the better body, the better career, the better children, the better home, the better husband? The social architecture of feminine competition, the specific, exhausting, grinding frequency of women measuring themselves against other women in every domain of life, is not a natural expression of feminine nature. It is the installed operating system of the suppression. It is the frequency of comparison that Volume 1 identified as the first whisper of the shadow into the battery's field. It is the mechanism that the suppression installed to ensure that the feminine frequencies that were meant to resonate with each other through a shared masculine ground would instead be directed toward each other as competitors, and would therefore never be capable of the unison that makes the grid operational. A competitor does not trust other women. She has been trained not to. She has been trained to see other women as threats to her access to resources, to masculine attention, to social status. She has been trained to evaluate other women against herself and to feel either superior or inferior, never simply different. And in the constant oscillation between superior and inferior, she has no access to the frequency of resonance that the unison requires. She is too busy measuring to simply be. And a woman who is measuring cannot resonate. And a woman who cannot resonate cannot be part of a grid. And a woman who is not part of a grid is, by definition, alone in the field with her voltage and nowhere safe to put it. Protocol 3, the redefinition audit. Purpose: to identify which of the four redefinitions is most active in your operating system and begin the process of consciously replacing the suppression's installed definition with the grid-aligned original. Duration: 1 hour divided across 4 days, 15 minutes per redefinition. Do not try to do all four in one session. Each one requires time to settle before the next can be received clearly. Day 1, the servicer versus the radiant source. In your notebook, answer, Where in my life am I organized around someone else's agenda rather than my own generative power? Be specific and honest. Then write, what would I be generating right now if I were operating as a radiant source rather than as a servicer? What has been waiting behind the service function for a space to emerge? Write the answer even if it feels selfish, especially if it feels selfish. The selfishness feeling is the suppression's enforcement mechanism. Right past it. Day 2, the warrior versus the radar. In your notebook, answer. What has my radar been detecting that I have been cycling as worry because there was no one to receive it as intelligence? Write the specific things you have been sensing about your situation, your children's trajectories, your financial reality, your relational field, that you have been carrying alone because there was no ground to receive the intelligence and convert it into action. Then write, if a fully grounded man received this intelligence right now and acted on it, what would he do? You are not asking for that man to appear. You are practicing the exercise of converting your perception from worry loop into actionable intelligence. The conversion is the beginning of the radar's restoration. Day 3, the suppressor versus the aegis. In your notebook, answer, what have I been compressing that needs to be released in a healthy direction? Not at a person, not in an explosion, in writing. In this notebook, which is private, which no one will read without your permission, write the truth that the compression has been holding. The anger, the grief, the hard knowledge, write it completely and without management. Then write, what would the iron flame say if she were not compressing herself for anyone's comfort? Write that too. You do not have to deliver it to anyone, you have to write it. The writing is the pressure release. The writing is the aegis learning that it is safe to be itself again in at least this one contained space. Day 4, the competitor versus the sovereign. In your notebook, answer, which woman in my life am I most actively comparing myself to right now? Be honest. Then write, what function does she represent that I am trying to claim as my territory instead of recognizing as her specific contribution to a circuit I am not in competition with her for? What would change in how I relate to her if I saw her as a different function rather than as a competing version of the same function? Then write, what is my specific function? Not in comparison to her, not in relation to any man, my function, the specific thing I generate, the specific way my frequency contributes to every field I inhabit that no one else in my life generates in quite the same way. Name it, own it, it is yours. No one else can take it from you and you do not need to take it from anyone else. The sovereign does not compete, she simply is what she is completely. Part 2, the awakening. The protocols for restoring the current. Chapter 4, the current regulation protocol, how the voltage comes back online. The restoration of the high voltage current does not look the way that the modern self-help industry has taught most women to imagine it. It is not a retreat weekend. It is not a spa day, though rest has its place in the restoration and we will address that. It is not a daily affirmation practice, though intentional language has real frequency effects and we will address that too. The restoration of the high voltage current is a structural project. It is the deliberate, daily, incremental rebuilding of the conditions in which the current can operate as it was designed to operate. At full voltage, with full direction, in a relational and physical environment that is capable of receiving it without being overwhelmed by it or requiring her to suppress it for the comfort of what surrounds her. The first thing the restoration requires is the honest acknowledgement of where the voltage currently is. Not where she wishes it were, not where it used to be before the years of overcurrent burn, not where it should theoretically be given her age and her health and her spiritual practice, where it actually is right now. The overcurrent is at unsustainable output and believes the output is the evidence of her strength. The collapse current has no accessible output and believes the absence of output is permanent damage. The armored current has output running at full capacity behind the armor and no safe direction for it to go. The scattered current has output that is going in every available direction at maximum intensity and is producing neither sustained achievement nor genuine connection. All four of these are real, specific, distinct starting conditions. And the restoration process must begin from the actual starting condition, not from an idealized one. The second thing the restoration requires is the identification of the specific functional face that the woman is most naturally aligned with. The root, the horizon, or the aegis, not as a permanent assignment, not as a limitation, as a starting point for understanding where her specific frequency is strongest, where her natural contribution to any circuit she inhabits is most essential, and where the wound has done the most damage because it attacked the thing that was most central to her function. The woman whose natural alignment is with the horizon has the deepest wound in the radar function, because the radar is her primary contribution, and it is the function that the suppression most specifically targeted when it converted her perception into worry. The woman whose natural alignment is with the aegis has the deepest wound in the compression function, because her capacity to hold and direct force is the function that the suppression most specifically turned inward when it converted her from shield to suppressor. The third thing the restoration requires is the daily, consistent, protocol-supported practice of operating the functional face in the conditions that are currently available, even when those conditions are not the optimal ones. You do not wait for the ground to appear before you begin restoring your function. You restore your function in the conditions you currently inhabit, and the restored function begins to change what conditions become available to you. The grid does not assemble itself and then invite the woman to step into it. The woman becomes what she is, and the grid assembles around the frequency of what she is. Restoration comes first. The circuit that matches the restored frequency comes after. The 4 pillars of the current restoration. Just as the pillar restoration required 4 interdependent practices, the current restoration requires 4 pillars that must be built simultaneously. They are not sequential, they are concurrent. They are 4 aspects of the same restoration, addressed from 4 different directions, converging on the same destination. A woman whose voltage is fully present, fully directed, and fully available to be received by the ground that her restored frequency will attract. The first pillar of the current restoration is frequency maintenance. The high-voltage current requires deliberate, regular maintenance of its own frequency. In the grid, this was partly provided by the circuit itself, by the mutual maintenance of frequency that the dawn alignment and the void communion and the evening refraction protocols ensured. In the absence of the full grid, the woman must take conscious responsibility for maintaining her own frequency through practices that she deliberately protects from the encroachment of the service function. This means time that is specifically allocated to her own regeneration and not available for redistribution to anyone else's needs. This time is not optional, it is maintenance. A generating system that does not receive maintenance does not gradually decline, it fails suddenly. The overcurrent who has not scheduled maintenance into her life is not managing without it. She is deferring the failure. The maintenance is not selfish. The maintenance is the condition of continued function. The second pillar is boundary sovereignty. The ungrounded current in all 4 expressions has a specific wound in the domain of boundaries. The overcurrent has boundaries she cannot enforce because every boundary she attempts to hold produces guilt. The collapsed current has boundaries she cannot articulate because the collapse has taken the energy required for articulation. The armored current has boundaries that are too rigid, that keep out the low-frequency intrusions but also keep out the high-frequency connections that her restoration requires. The scattered current has no consistent boundaries at all, which is why her voltage is everywhere simultaneously. The restoration of boundary sovereignty is not the installation of harder walls. It is the development of a frequency-based discernment, the ability to distinguish between the inputs that add to her charge and the inputs that draw from her reserve, and the practice of saying yes to the former and no to the latter with the same ease and the same lack of guilt. Third pillar is voltage direction. The ungrounded current scatters because it has no channel. The restoration of voltage direction is the practice of deliberately choosing one primary generative focus, and directing the voltage toward it with the same intensity that the overcurrent has been directing at everything and the same focus that the armored current has been directing inward. Not every aspect of life simultaneously. One primary generative focus, the thing she is building, the thing she is creating. The thing that, when she is operating at full grid-aligned capacity, will be her specific contribution to the world. The direction of significant voltage toward a single focus produces momentum. Momentum produces results. Results produce the evidence that her frequency, when directed rather than scattered, is as powerful as Volume 1 claimed it was. The fourth pillar is feminine alliance. The suppression installed comparison as the operating frequency of feminine relationships. The restoration requires the deliberate practice of the opposite, resonance-based feminine alliance, the intentional cultivation of relationships with women whose frequencies complement rather than duplicate her own, not women who are the same as her. Women who are different in the specific way that complementary functions are different, mutually necessary, mutually enhancing, operating on the same circuit without competing for the same role. This is the beginning of the reconstruction of the unison, not the full grid unison, the proto-unison, the specific relational frequency that the three women of the battery shared before they had the man's ground as their shared center, the feminine alliance that prepares the frequency for the circuit. The women who practice resonance with each other, who learn to recognize each other's functional faces and support rather than compete with them, are the ones who will be ready when the ground that can receive their combined frequency appears. Protocol 4, the current regulation practice. Purpose: to build the 4 pillars of the current restoration into a daily and weekly practice that accumulates over time into a structural change in how the voltage is held and directed. Duration varies by component. The daily minimum is 20 minutes. The weekly practice adds 1 longer session. Daily frequency maintenance, 20 minutes minimum. This time is protected. It is not available for children, for work, for partners, for anyone. It is the maintenance window. What happens in it is your choice, and it will evolve as the restoration progresses. The only requirement is that it is something that adds to your frequency rather than drawing from it. It is not housework. It is not email. It is not something you do for someone else. It is something that makes you more of what you are, reading. Moving your body in a way that feels like expression rather than obligation. Creating something, sitting in silence, being in nature, whatever specifically adds charge to your specific frequency. You know what it is. You have been deprioritizing it for years in favor of the service function. Stop deprioritizing it. 20 minutes is the minimum. It is not enough, but it is the beginning of the practice of treating your frequency as a priority rather than a luxury. Daily 1 boundary practice. Once per day, identify 1 request or demand that is drawing from your reserve rather than adding to your frequency, and practice saying no to it. Not aggressively, not apologetically. Simply, I cannot do that today, or that does not work for me, without explanation, without justification, without the lengthy accounting for why you cannot do the thing that the servicer wound requires before any no can be legitimate. Write the boundary in your notebook. Write how it felt to hold it. Over 30 days, you will have 30 entries. The pattern in those entries will show you exactly where the servicer wound is strongest and where the sovereign is beginning to emerge. Weekly, the voltage direction session, 90 minutes. Once per week, sit alone with your notebook and your primary generative focus. Not your obligations, your focus. The thing you are building. Spend 90 minutes working on it without interruption. If 90 minutes feels impossible, that is the most important information in this protocol. The impossibility of 90 minutes for your own primary creation is the exact measurement of how completely the service function has colonized your time and your frequency. Begin with 30 minutes and add 10 minutes per week until you reach 90. The direction of voltage toward your primary focus, maintained weekly over 6 months, will produce results that will rewrite your understanding of what you are capable of when your current has a channel. Monthly, the Alliance session. Once per month, gather with at least 1 woman whose frequency complements yours. not for complaint, not for the specific kind of feminine social bonding that is organized around shared grievance which feels connecting but is actually the suppression's substitute for genuine resonance, for shared generation. For the specific conversation in which 2 or 3 women who understand their own functional faces and respect each other's contribute their different perceptions and capacities to a shared question, challenge, or creative project. Notice the difference in the frequency of this conversation compared to conversations organized around comparison or complaint. The difference is the beginning of the proto-unison, the beginning of the feminine alliance that the grid will one day require. Chapter 5: The Woman Who Does Not Need Saving, and What She Actually Needs. The most dangerous idea that has been installed in the woman who has been carrying the ungrounded current for years is the idea that what she needs is rescue. That somewhere there is a man who will arrive and lift the load from her shoulders and make everything manageable, and she will finally be able to rest. This idea is dangerous not because rescue is inherently wrong, but because it positions her as passive, as the object of someone else's action rather than the agent of her own restoration. And a woman who is waiting to be rescued is not doing the protocol work. She is waiting, and waiting at the frequency of the ungrounded current is not neutral. It is the continuation of the scatter, the continuation of the overcurrent's burn, the continuation of the armored current's isolation, the continuation of the collapsed current's depletion. What she actually needs is not rescue, it is ground, and the distinction is everything. Rescue is something done to her. Ground is something that allows her to be fully what she already is. The man who rescues takes over her load. The man who grounds creates the conditions in which she can put down the load she was never meant to carry alone and redirect her voltage toward what she was actually designed to generate. The rescued woman is relieved of burden. The grounded woman is restored to function. These are completely different outcomes, and only one of them produces the living battery. The woman who has done the protocol work of this volume has not been preparing herself to be rescued. She has been preparing herself to be grounded. She has been restoring her frequency to the state in which a ground can actually function in relation to it. Because here's the physics that the rescue narrative obscures. A ground can only ground what is already generating. A man who has restored his pillar function cannot ground a woman who has not restored her current. There is nothing for the ground to receive. The circuit cannot close if only one side is active. Both poles must be generating before the connection between them produces anything. The woman who has done the work of identifying her expression, auditing her load, recognizing the redefinitions that were installed in her operating system, practicing the 4 pillars of her current restoration, and beginning to develop the boundary sovereignty and the voltage direction and the feminine alliance that the grid requires, that woman is not waiting to be rescued. She's becoming what the circuit has always needed her to be. She is becoming, slowly and with the specific dignity of a woman who has chosen her own restoration, the radiant source operating at a frequency that the restored pillar will recognize across a room. The conversation between the poles. At some point in the restoration of both the pillar and the current, the 2 poles must have a conversation. Not the conversation of the gender war, which is the conversation between 2 wounded poles who have been told they are enemies. Not the conversation of rescue, which is the conversation between a passive recipient and an active provider. The conversation of the circuit. The conversation in which 2 people who have each been doing the work of restoring their own function begin to recognize, in each other, the frequency of the complementary component they have been developing their capacity to connect with. This conversation does not begin with attraction in the conventional sense, though attraction is frequently present. It begins with recognition, the specific recognition of a frequency that the nervous system identifies as groundable or currentable, depending on which pole the person inhabits. The pillar who has been doing his protocol work recognizes the woman whose current is generating at a frequency his ground can receive. The woman who has been doing her protocol work recognizes the man whose ground is stable enough that her full voltage can flow through it without overwhelming it. Neither of them is performing. Neither of them is managing the other's impression of them. They are simply in the presence of the other's actual frequency, and their own nervous systems are telling them something they have not felt before or have not felt since the last time, years or decades ago, when they were briefly in the presence of something close to this. The conversation between the poles is not the end of the restoration. It is the next phase of it, because the circuit once begun requires the same maintenance that Volume 1 described in the 4 quarterly pulses. The dawn alignment and the evening refraction and the void communion do not become unnecessary because the poles have found each other. They become more necessary because the circuit has more to protect and more to sustain and more at stake than either pole had when they were operating alone. The conversation between the poles is the beginning of the battery. What comes after the beginning is the subject of the remaining volumes of this series. Protocol 5, the frequency signal. Purpose: to begin intentionally broadcasting your restored current frequency rather than broadcasting the wound frequency, so that what comes toward you in the relational field begins to match what you are actually